heard her scream. That's what I'm pretty sure she said. Someone's here.
Would murder 4 University of Idaho students.
Because of him, 4 beautiful people were taken from this world.
Star piece of evidence in the prosecution's case is the DNA that was found on the knife sheath.
Radar's head. Sure. Oh, yeah. Do you have your license, the registration, insurance?
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger.
I will call you what you are. Sociopath, psychopath, murderer.
The town of Moscow, Idaho, looked like the kind of place where nothing truly terrible was supposed to happen. A quiet college town, tree-lined streets, students walking home after parties, lights glowing inside shared houses near campus. The kind of town where parents dropped their kids off believing they'd be safe. And then, in the middle of one November night, that illusion shattered. 4 University of Idaho students were stabbed to death inside an off-campus house on King Road. No gunshots, no screams heard across the neighborhood, no forced entry. Just silence and a crime scene so brutal that even experienced investigators struggled to describe it publicly.
Where did the 4 students live before the murders happened?
The murders didn't just shock Idaho, they sent fear across the entire country. Because for weeks, nobody knew who had done it. And somewhere out there, the killer was still walking free. Students began leaving campus. Parents begged their kids to come home. Doors stayed locked. Lights stayed on all night. In a town with barely 25,000 people, paranoia spread fast. Everyone wanted the same answer. Why? Why these 4 students? Why this house? And who could walk into a home filled with young people and commit something so violent so quietly? The victims were 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Goncalves.
How can you be out there playing? My daughter's dead.
Friends described them as outgoing, funny, social, the kind of people who made everyone around them feel comfortable. Their social media pages showed smiling photos, parties, football games, road trips, late-night food runs, completely normal college lives. That normalcy became part of what made the case so haunting, because when people looked at the victims, they saw themselves, or their children, or their friends. Kaylee Goncalves had recently moved out of the King Road house and was only back in town for the weekend. She had just bought herself a car after landing a new job. Friends said she was excited about her future. She spent the night reconnecting with people she loved. Nobody knew it would be the last night of her life. Earlier that evening, Ethan and Xana attended a party at the Sigma Chi fraternity house. Madison and Kaylee went downtown to bars near campus before stopping at a food truck late at night. Surveillance footage captured them laughing, joking, waiting for food together. It looked like every ordinary college weekend in America. By around 2 a.m., everyone had returned to the house on King Road. Inside were 6 people total: Kaylee, Madison, Xana, Ethan, and 2 surviving roommates sleeping on lower floors of the home. Sometime between roughly 4 and 4:25 in the morning, 4 people were murdered with a knife. The killer moved through the house in darkness. Investigators would later say the attacks were targeted, but at first, almost nothing made sense. There were no signs of forced entry. No murder weapon was found, and somehow 2 roommates inside the home survived. When police publicly confirmed that 4 students had been stabbed to death, national media exploded. Helicopters circled above the town. Reporters filled sidewalks near the crime scene. Crime bloggers, TikTok creators, Reddit forums, YouTube channels, everyone started investigating on their own. The internet became obsessed with Moscow, Idaho, and that obsession quickly turned dangerous. Every person remotely connected to the victims became a suspect online. Friends, ex-boyfriends, neighbors, random people captured in surveillance footage. One man who appeared near the food truck was labeled Hoodie Guy by internet sleuths who spent weeks analyzing his body language frame by frame. Some people accused the surviving roommates. Others accused professors, neighbors, classmates. Even people who had never met the victims started receiving harassment because online communities convinced themselves they had solved the murders. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, investigators were building a case piece by piece. One of the most important details wouldn't become public until much later. A knife sheath had been found near one of the victims, and on the snap of that sheath was DNA. At first, though, police stayed extremely careful with what they released. That secrecy frustrated the public. Weeks passed without an arrest. Fear turned into suspicion. Some families started questioning whether the investigation was failing.
What car did police search for during the investigation?
But detectives were following a trail involving surveillance footage, phone records, and eventually a white Hyundai Elantra. That car would become the turning point in the case. Investigators reviewed security cameras from homes and businesses across the area. Over and over, one vehicle kept appearing near King Road around the estimated time of the murders.
We believe through our investigation that car was in the area during the time of the murders.
A white Hyundai Elantra. The car circled the neighborhood multiple times in the early morning hours before disappearing from view near the estimated time of the attacks. Then, minutes later, it was seen speeding away. Police publicly announced they were searching for the vehicle, believing its occupant may have critical information. Suddenly, thousands of white Elantras across America became objects of suspicion. Tips flooded in, and eventually, one campus police officer at Washington State University found something interesting. A white Hyundai Elantra registered to a criminology PhD student named Bryan Kohberger. He lived just across the state border in Pullman, Washington, less than 15 minutes from the murder scene.
Radar's head. Sure. Oh, yeah. Do you have your license, the registration, insurance?
At first glance, nothing connected him directly to the crime. He was studying criminal justice. Intelligent, quiet, socially awkward according to some classmates, but not publicly known as violent. But when investigators looked closer, more pieces started lining up. Phone records allegedly showed his device near the victim's neighborhood multiple times in the months before the murders. And on the night of the killings, his phone suddenly stopped communicating with cell towers during the exact time frame investigators believed the attacks occurred. Then it came back on afterward. To prosecutors, that gap looked suspicious. To the defense, it wasn't proof of anything, but the investigation was accelerating fast. As investigators gathered evidence, the atmosphere inside Moscow grew darker. Students traveled in groups. Parents begged universities for answers. Rumors spread daily online.
What did the surviving roommate say she saw that night?
And inside the King Road house itself, one surviving roommate had reportedly seen something terrifying that night.
And she screamed and just ran downstairs. And I called her name, but I jumped up and locked my door.
A masked man walking through the home after the murders. A figure dressed in black, tall, athletic, with bushy eyebrows. The image became burned into the public imagination because suddenly the killer no longer felt faceless. He felt real.
I'm almost positive he's wearing a full black outfit. And he had this mask.
According to investigators, one of the surviving roommates woke up sometime during the early morning hours after hearing noises inside the house. At first, it didn't immediately sound like a massacre. That detail would later become one of the most controversial parts of the entire case. The roommate reportedly heard what sounded like movement upstairs, maybe talking, maybe crying. At one point, she allegedly heard someone say, "There's someone here." At another moment, she thought she heard crying coming from Xana's room.
I heard her scream. That's what I'm pretty sure she said. Someone's here.
Then she opened her bedroom door and saw a man dressed in black walking past her inside the house, not running, not panicking, just calmly moving toward the sliding glass door exit. Investigators later described the man as wearing dark clothing and a mask covering his mouth and nose. The surviving roommate said she noticed his bushy eyebrows before he disappeared into the darkness. Then came the detail that stunned people across the country. Police were not called until nearly noon the next day, roughly 8 hours after the murders were believed to have happened. Online speculation exploded immediately. People demanded answers. Why didn't she call 911? Why didn't she check on her friends? How could someone see a masked man inside the house and go back into their room? But trauma experts pointed out that human beings do not always react logically during extreme fear. Some people scream, some fight, some freeze completely. Investigators said the roommate described herself as being in a frozen shock phase, and regardless of public opinion, her eyewitness account became a major piece of the case because it helped establish a timeline. While the public obsessed over theories online, detectives were working through mountains of evidence behind closed doors. Surveillance footage, cell tower data, DNA testing, vehicle movements, digital records. Then came one of the most significant breakthroughs. The knife sheath found beside Madison Mogen's body allegedly contained single-source male DNA.
Star piece of evidence in the prosecution's case is the DNA that was found on the knife sheath.
Investigators ran the profile through law enforcement databases. No match. That meant whoever left it behind either had no criminal record or had never submitted DNA before. But the sample still mattered enormously, because detectives could now begin eliminating suspects one by one. And there were a lot of suspects. The internet had turned nearly everyone connected to the victims into targets. Neighbors gave interviews defending themselves. Friends received threats. Men seen in food truck footage were accused of murder by strangers online. One nearby neighbor later described how terrifying it was to suddenly see millions of people analyzing every detail of his behavior on social media. A simple interview became proof to internet detectives that he was guilty. Meanwhile, actual investigators kept following the evidence. The white Hyundai Elantra remained central. Security footage allegedly showed the vehicle making repeated passes near the King Roadhouse between roughly 3:30 and 4 in the morning. At one point, investigators believed the car attempted a three-point turn near the home before disappearing from camera view during the estimated murder window. Then around 4:20 a.m., the car was seen speeding away from the area. Once investigators identified Bryan Kohberger as the owner of a white Elantra matching the description, they started digging deeper into his background. What they found raised more questions. Kohberger was a criminology PhD student at Washington State University. Before that, he had studied criminal justice extensively and reportedly showed a deep interest in the psychology of criminals. One online survey allegedly linked to him asked former criminals about their emotions while committing crimes. That revelation instantly fueled media fascination. The idea of a criminology student potentially committing one of the country's most shocking murders sounded almost too disturbing to be real. People immediately compared the case to serial killers who studied law enforcement tactics or criminal psychology. But prosecutors still needed more than theories. They needed evidence placing him at the crime scene. That's where the phone records became important. Investigators claimed Kohberger's cell phone data showed his device near the victim's neighborhood on multiple occasions in the months leading up to the murders. According to the probable cause affidavit, his phone had allegedly been in the area at least 12 separate times late at night or early in the morning. Then came the timeline from the murder night itself. Prosecutors alleged Kohberger's phone stopped reporting to the network between approximately 2:47 a.m. and 4:48 a.m. That gap overlapped almost perfectly with the estimated time of the murders. To investigators, it looked like someone intentionally disabling their phone to avoid being tracked. To the defense, it was circumstantial. Phones lose signal, batteries die. Devices enter airplane mode for innocent reasons. Still, combined with the white Elantra, the eyewitness account, and the DNA evidence, the case against him was growing rapidly. Then investigators made another move. In December 2022, surveillance teams tracked Kohberger as he traveled across the country with his father back to Pennsylvania for winter break.
Who was arrested for the murders of the Idaho students?
Law enforcement reportedly monitored him for days. Finally, in the early morning hours, a SWAT team moved in. Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The arrest immediately became global news. Cameras lined the streets outside the house. Helicopters flew overhead. Every major network covered the story live. And one detail from the arrest especially grabbed attention. According to reports, investigators found Kohberger awake in the kitchen wearing latex gloves and placing trash into separate plastic bags.
Hey, Bryan! Bryan, did you do it?
How you feeling?
How you feeling, Bryan?
The public reaction was immediate. To many people, it looked bizarre and incriminating. But the legal process was only beginning, because despite the massive public attention, prosecutors still had to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And almost immediately, the defense began pushing back hard. Kohberger's attorneys argued that the public had already decided he was guilty long before any trial. They questioned the DNA evidence, questioned the cell phone evidence, questioned investigative procedures, and perhaps most importantly, they pointed to one critical issue. No murder weapon had ever been found. That absence created space for doubt. Defense experts argued that DNA transfer can happen indirectly. Someone's DNA can appear on an object without them ever committing a crime. The sheath itself, they claimed, did not automatically prove Kohberger carried the knife into the house during the murders. Prosecutors saw it differently. To them, the totality of evidence painted a devastating picture. A suspect allegedly connected to the victim's area multiple times before the murders. A white Hyundai Elantra circling the house. A phone going dark during the killings. DNA on a knife sheath found beside one of the victims. And an eyewitness description that roughly matched the defendant.
Defense is not necessarily having to prove that he's innocent. They just have to raise doubt.
As details emerged publicly, the case became one of the most heavily debated murder investigations in modern America. Some people believed the evidence was overwhelming. Others believed the investigation still had unanswered questions. And at the center of it all sat Bryan Kohberger himself, emotionless during many court appearances, watching silently as the world tried to understand why 4 students had died inside that house on King Road. As the investigation continued, the house on King Road became one of the most recognizable crime scenes in America.
How did the murders affect the town of Moscow?
Students gathered outside, crying in silence. Parents hugged their children tighter. And everywhere across Moscow, Idaho, there was one feeling nobody could escape: fear. Because what happened inside that house felt deeply personal to people. These weren't celebrities. They weren't living dangerous lives. They were ordinary college students doing ordinary things. Going to parties, taking selfies, ordering late-night food, laughing with friends. Then suddenly, within minutes, everything was gone. For investigators, though, the emotional weight of the case couldn't interfere with the legal process. Every piece of evidence had to survive intense scrutiny, especially because prosecutors announced they intended to seek the death penalty. That meant the defense team would challenge everything, and they did. One major focus became the DNA evidence found on the knife sheath. Prosecutors described it as single-source male DNA connected to Bryan Kohberger, but defense experts argued that DNA evidence is often misunderstood by the public. DNA can transfer indirectly. Someone can touch an object, another person handles it later, and traces remain.
We're not sure how the state decides on Bryan Kohberger.
The defense argued that finding DNA on a sheath did not automatically prove Kohberger committed murder, but prosecutors believed the context mattered. The sheath wasn't found in a random location. According to investigators, it was discovered beside Madison Mogen's body inside the murder scene itself. Combined with the phone data and vehicle evidence, prosecutors believed the sheath became far more powerful. Then there was the issue of the surviving roommate's eyewitness testimony. Defense attorneys' jurors would likely question the timeline. Why wasn't 9/11 called for hours? Why did the roommate lock herself inside instead of immediately contacting police? But prosecutors believed her testimony still carried enormous emotional weight. Imagine being half asleep in darkness, opening your door, and seeing a masked stranger walking through your home after allegedly killing 4 people. That image alone could stay with a jury forever. The defense also focused heavily on the King Road house itself. The home had a reputation as a social gathering spot. Friends, classmates, visitors, partygoers, countless people had reportedly been inside over time. Defense attorneys suggested that the environment complicated the DNA evidence because many unknown individuals potentially had access to the house. But prosecutors kept returning to one question. If Bryan Kohberger had an innocent explanation for his DNA being found on the knife sheath beside a victim's body, what was it? That question hung over the entire case, and so did another one: motive. To this day, prosecutors have never publicly presented a fully clear motive explaining why these 4 students were targeted. That absence fascinates people because human beings naturally search for reasons behind violence. We want events to make sense. We want a clean explanation. But sometimes crimes don't provide one. Investigators explored possible connections between Kohberger and the victims. Reports emerged about social media accounts allegedly linked to him following some of the students online. Others speculated he may have encountered Madison or Xana at the restaurant where they worked. Nothing publicly revealed so far has established a confirmed close relationship between the accused and the victims. And in some ways, that uncertainty makes the case even more disturbing. Because if the victims barely knew him or never knew him at all, then the murders begin to feel random in the most terrifying way possible. As media coverage intensified, criminal psychologists started weighing in publicly. Some experts suggested the killer may have fantasized about power, control, domination. Others pointed toward obsession, rejection, resentment, or the psychological thrill of committing the perfect crime. But experts also warned against turning speculation into fact. At the end of the day, much of the public still doesn't know exactly what prosecutors know. There's a gag order surrounding many aspects of the case, limiting what attorneys and investigators can publicly discuss. And because of that, enormous questions remain unanswered. What happened minute by minute inside the house? Were the victims specifically targeted? Did the killer intend to attack everyone inside? Why were 2 roommates spared? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why? For the victims' families, though, the legal arguments and internet theories can never undo what was lost.
You're evil. There's no place for you in heaven. You took our children.
Parents who once received late-night phone calls from their children now visit graves instead. Friends who shared apartments, classrooms, football games, birthdays, and road trips now speak about memories in past tense.
Kaylee, she was like the protector. If we needed honestly anything, she would just do it.
At vigils, families described Ethan as someone who could always make people smile. Madison as someone who lit up every room she entered. Xana as funny, energetic, and full of life. Kaylee as deeply loyal, loving, and impossible to forget. Again and again, loved ones repeated the same painful reality. These were real people, not characters in a documentary, not names in headlines. Real people whose futures disappeared in a single night. And while the court process moves slowly, public fascination with the case has never faded. Every hearing becomes national news. Every filing gets analyzed online. Every expression from Bryan Kohberger inside the courtroom becomes another subject of debate. Some people already believe the case is overwhelming. Others believe major questions still exist. That divide reflects something larger about modern true crime itself. Social media transformed millions of viewers into amateur detectives, analyzing body language, timelines, phone records, surveillance videos, and legal documents in real time. Sometimes that attention helps keep cases visible. Other times, it creates misinformation and destroys innocent people caught in the middle. The Idaho murders became one of the clearest examples of both. For weeks, online accusations spread faster than verified facts. Innocent people were harassed. Rumors became headlines. Entire theories formed around tiny fragments of information. Meanwhile, 4 families were grieving the worst moment imaginable under a national spotlight. And still, through all the chaos, the center of the story remains painfully simple. 4 students went home after a normal Saturday night, and by sunrise, they were dead. The quiet college town of Moscow, Idaho, would never feel the same again. No matter what eventually happens in court, no matter what verdict comes, the images from that case are now permanently burned into American true crime history. The King Roadhouse surrounded by police tape, students leaving campus in fear, the white Hyundai Elantra, the knife sheath, the surviving roommate frozen in shock, and the haunting realization that evil sometimes arrives without warning, in places where people once felt safest. For the families, though, the focus has always been bigger than headlines or courtroom drama. Justice is about remembering who Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee truly were before the tragedy. Young people with futures, with plans, with families who loved them, and with lives that should have continued far beyond one cold November night in Idaho.